Thank you for joining The Best of the Best, brought to you by Biles Wilson PLLC, a business litigation firm based here in Texas, but with a national practice.
Hi, I'm Jeremy Wilson.
And I'm Dunham Biles, and we're joined here today by my good friend, Chris King. Welcome to the show.
Thanks. Good to be here. Thanks for having me.
And so, Chris, tell us about your company, Status Flow.
Yeah, well, I built Status Flow because I have a history of making seemingly impossible things happen, and I figure, well, if I can do it for me, I can teach other people to do the same thing. So you call us with your no way that could ever happen, that's exactly what we're going to get done.
So why do they call you the witch doctor, though?
There was something a client said. He said, because, we do fall under the umbrella of coaching and consulting. And this client, he said, you're not a coach. And I said, okay, well, what am I? He said, you're some kind of witch doctor, shaman, voodoo medicine man thing. And I was like, yeah, all right, that's cool. I'll buy a hat. So I did.
Well, you mentioned the background a little bit. I'm sure our audience would like to hear maybe a little bit about that.
Yeah, well, it started with just like passion projects and things. When I was 21 years old, I decided that I wanted to be an NCAA ice hockey player. And there were two things standing in my way. The first thing was, number one, I was failing out of my junior college because not a particularly good student. And number two, I had never skated before. So, but I put all my heart and effort into it. And fast forward, I think it was about 18 months, I was leading that team in the state championship.
Wow. That's great.
Yeah. So don't tell me what can't be done.
Sure. Absolutely.
So what type of coaching do you do? I know you primarily tend to have clients who are female, but what are you helping these folks with?
Yeah, there are two sides of the business. There's the B2B side and the B2C side. So the B2B we're working with, usually it's a smaller team within a larger organization, a small to middle market company, and they have some kind of new initiative or new thing that they've never done before. And so we sort of model it after Lockheed Skunk Works, like how do we make the impossible things happen really fast?
Sure.
And for the B2C side, it's very different. Like an organization, they might be trying to pivot the organization, or they might be launching some new widget or change the world in some way, shape, or form. Individuals, the seemingly impossible shows up in a lot of different ways. It's, how do I get out of my soul-sucking job, or how do I change my relationship, or how do I get my 26-year-old off my couch and off the payroll, right? Like the seemingly impossible for an individual is very different. But whatever that thing is, and this is what I learned, kind of a little bit later, was that there's a science to making things happen like this, and you can apply that science to just about anything because the science is scalable.
Now, to me, I think I understand what you do is to be something that I've always referred to as controlling my mind rather than my mind controlling me. Is that what you're trying to help people do?
Well, that's where it starts,
yeah.
Right? There's a lot of mental framework because ultimately I look through a very binary lens. The way you're showing up in the world, the way somebody is operating, what they're thinking, feeling, doing, the way they're behaving, and even their own energy field is either aligned or misaligned with the outcome that they're trying to experience or whatever it is they're trying to achieve. And so if there's a misalignment, it's sort of like picking a lock to a door. Inside the door lock, there are these tumblers, and they need to be aligned just perfectly. And when you get those aligned, that's when you can turn the knob and open the door. Well, the life you want, the dreams you want, the goals you have, same kind of thing.
Gotcha. So if I'm a company, I've got 20 employees, let's just imagine. Mm-hmm. What is it that makes me think, hey, I need to call that Chris King and I need to talk to him and see if he can help me?
Well, it's typically a function of friction.
Okay.
They're getting in their way in some way, shape, or form. Maybe they know what that is. Maybe they don't. But they know they need some kind of support and some kind of help. They're typically not terribly stuck in the mud in terms of a super dysfunctional team, or they have the petty tyrants or the narcissists and all that kind of stuff. Like I'm too old for that shit. I don't want to do that anymore.
Yeah.
But they do have an idea of what they want, and they have no idea how to get there. And so we go in and address the behaviors and the conditions in the organization to produce what we ultimately know as flow states, what athletes call being in the zone or runner's high. It has a lot of different names, but it's all driven by neurochemistry. So if you can set the conditions and the behaviors in a team or in an organization, you can get them into the zone, you can get them a lot faster, a lot more creative, and a lot less stressed out.
I saw that on your website talking about this flow state. Can you describe for us a little more kind of what that is and what, when you're in that state, what are the advantages of being in that state?
Well, there are some signature characteristics of flow. Like time starts to pass in a really funny way. Like I'm sure you've been working on a case or something and you kind of put your head down and it felt like 20, 30 minutes went by. You looked up, it'd been like 2.5 hours, right? And you have this amazing piece of work product in front of you. Mm-hmm. So that's a flow state, right? But time dilates in a really weird way. There's no ego identification when you're operating at that level. There's just the oneness with the thing you're working on. That seems to be all there is in your universe. And so it's a deep embodied kind of experience. And so, and this is kind of the indicator that is what's occurring for you.
So how did you first become interested in learning about flow and teaching flow, getting people to get there and the neuroscience behind it?
I read a book actually by a guy who later became kind of a mentor of mine. Actually, I was fortunate enough to spend a little bit of time with a guy by the name of Stephen Kotler. He's written a bunch of books. He wrote Bold. He wrote The Future is Faster Than You Think. He wrote Art of Impossible, Rising Superman. The book that I read was Stealing Fire, and that's what got me really hooked into it. It was actually a former romantic partner of mine. She said, "You should probably read this book," and so I did. I'm like, "Oh, I'm all about this," and that kind of added a whole new element to the coaching practice, and so that's just where I put all my eggs in that basket at that time.
Well, I know you mentioned, I think it sounds like we kind of all naturally get into flow states sometimes, but it sounds like you've identified ways to help people get into that flow state. What types of things can help with that?
Yeah. They're what we call flow triggers. Okay, there are 22 that we know of. There's two versions of flow. There's individual, team, and then like communitas, like at a rock concert or a rave party or something. Sure. And so there are 22 triggers that we know of. Autonomy is one of them, right? People need to steer their own ships and feel like they can do it well. So if you have somebody in your organization that's a micromanager, that team's going to have a very hard time getting into a flow state. They need novelty, right? Things need to be a little different. Risk, right? We have to have some risk involved because risk is a focusing mechanism. There's a chemical in the brain called norepinephrine, sometimes known as noradrenaline, and it's a focusing mechanism. And so it sort of lowers the cognitive load on your brain and gets you focused on that one thing. And so when there's risk involved, that's what starts to happen in your mind. And so the more flow triggers that are involved, the more you can access flow and get into these states.
But I think I've also heard you talk about before that you can't stay in flow all the time. That you gotta take a break. How do you help people with that too?
That's the tricky part. Actually, training into flow is one thing. Training out of it is a lot harder because flow is a euphoric experience. I mean, we call it an autotelic experience. We'll do it just to be in flow for no other reason, just because it feels so great. And the problem with that is that it feels so good you want to stay in there as long as you possibly can. The problem with doing that is that the longer you stay in, the more of your neurochemistry you burn out, and then the longer it's going to take to recover to come back. And so you need to find all kinds of tools and ways to sort of punch out. I mean, one of them, the indicators, is when you start to notice how good it feels. Well, you're sort of coming back into awareness of yourself, right? That I is coming back, and that's the indicator that it's starting to slip. So if you just punch out right then, right? That's a great opportunity to take a break and then come back later and pick up where you left off.
Now, one of the things we've clearly talked about is how you can help teams and companies and so forth. But I happen to know that you've helped at least one of my friends a lot in their personal life. Yeah. So you do a lot of that as well. So how does this work on an individual basis as opposed to company?
It can be truly, as much as I dislike the word, I'm going to sound like a West Side LA hippie or something. Guilty as charged, right? It's like my old man's an electromagnetic compatibility engineer, and then I run in the hippie. So I got feet in both ponds, right? Yeah. But when we can get somebody pivoted correctly, and it's not so much what we have to start doing as it is what we have to stop doing. I love the quote about the statue of David. When they ask him, how'd you create David? And he said, I didn't create him. He was already in there. I just had to remove the stuff that wasn't him. Yep. And that's what we're doing is we're stripping away all the things that are in the way because, speed is a function of horsepower, sure, but it's also a function of friction and weight, right? Yep. So you remove the friction, remove the weight, you get a lot faster, a lot quicker.
What do you find are some of the common impediments to people, who are trying to those things you chip away? I mean, like, can you give us some examples of not people you've worked with, obviously, but the types of things that get in people's way?
I think the biggest one is that humans generally create, validate, and recreate the reality of their understanding. What I'm trying to do is break that. Because the reality that you understand has gotten you where you are, and what got you here will not get you there. And so I have to call into question everything a client thinks is real. And because it's only real because they've proven it time and time again, right? We can disprove it just as easily. So it starts with what you think. Like when I go to an organization, I tell them on the first meeting, here's what you're not going to bring me. You're not going to bring me your sales histories. You're not going to bring me your KPIs. You're not going to bring me your market trends. I don't want to see any of that stuff because it's only going to screw up what I think is possible, what I think we can do here, because it's going to start limiting me. And I can't have that, because if I can reorient a team or an individual on what they believe is possible, I'm going to make a lot more happen a lot quicker than if we deal with the practical application of just the blocking and tackling and the numbers.
Sure.
Right. It's the Bannister principle, right? The 4-minute mile guy.
Yep.
Right?
Yeah, exactly. Once it's broke, then everybody
right. Once it's broke, right? After decades of trying to make it happen, his record lasted 46 days.
Yeah.
Right. Just
gone.
Well, it sounds like you're kind of focusing on reorienting people away from. We all think of these external factors that are holding us back or keeping us from achieving things. It sounds like you're trying to change the paradigm of how we view those factors. Are they really impediments, or are they not?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I mean, at the risk of sounding like Dr. Phil, I'll just say something like, "Well, how's that working for you?" Right.
Yeah.
Working or not working, aligned or misaligned, right? Effective or ineffective.
Yeah.
It really does get pretty simple. This work is actually shockingly simple. It's not easy, but it's very simple.
Yeah. So last time I saw you speak, and I think this has to do with sort of reprogramming the mind, right? I think part of what you're doing is trying to help people stop the feedback loop that is reinforcing negative thoughts. Is that right?
Yeah, because just through the lens of neuroscience, right? Everybody has an operating system in their head, right? Just like a computer or a phone, right? We have our own personal OS. We call it a belief system. And the loop that you mentioned, the system creates every thought that somebody has. The thoughts are then experienced as feelings. Feelings drive actions. Actions produce results. And where humans get weird is that the results are unconsciously pre-designed to support and validate the system that started it. So this loop is going around and around and around. So what I got to do is create what I call hiccups. If I can create a little hiccup in that loop, there's an opportunity for consciousness to come in. And now instead of 70,000 thoughts that we're going to have today, most of which being completely subconscious, well, now we're bringing awareness to it. And until there's awareness, there's really no choice. And so once we start to understand how someone's human system works, well, we can start hacking it.
It reminds me a little bit about, in the legal field, there's this trend. This was probably 10 years ago. They were called the reptile, where they were trying to kind of determine how juries perceive information. And in some of the science they pointed to that a lot of times when we think we're mulling over a problem, we think we're equally balancing all of the different factors, but we're really not. Our brains kind of make a decision, a gut instinct survival decision right at the beginning, and then we just reinforce it. And we try to think we're analyzing it, we're not. And it sounds very similar to what you're talking about, where we kind of get an idea in our head and it kind of keeps looping around that same idea. It's hard to kind of break out of that.
Yeah, I think this is maybe part of the magic. When I was a kid, my grammar school teachers all said I was disruptive, and I could not agree more. And it was one of those things where I don't know to this day where this came from, but anytime somebody would bring me a premise of anything, the first thing I want to do is shoot holes in it.
Yeah.
I don't even know why. Maybe just to be an ass, I just. So and that works very well in this umbrella, right?
Yeah.
Under this umbrella. So it's like, well, here's the way things have to be. Really, not so much.
You're certainly disruptive, but one of the thoughts I had was that you're also irreverent, and I think you're the way in which you're irreverent, though. I assume this will be interesting because I have no idea, but I think it's very purposeful. I think that there's a reason and purpose behind your irreverent ways, but am I right? Because you call your show Mindfuck. I mean, that's not, and you call your Provisors group Rogue One. There's something going on there in your mind.
I don't make the rules.
You evolve.
I can only. Look. I'm not that strategic. When I say is these things don't come from me, they come through me, right?
Sure.
So I'm something of a conduit for it. But the mindfuck thing, that podcast, my marketing guy came up with that name. I fought with him for a month on it, and then I finally caved. I'm like, fine, you call it what you want. I can think of one time when it was very deliberate, and it was one of those moments where it was going to get the organization a lot farther ahead a lot quicker, or it was going to get me fired. Like, it was an all-in kind of bet.
Sure.
I'm going to use some language here, just warning. I was working with a faith-based nonprofit, and things were just not happening, and they were dragging their heels and kind of wasting my time. Now, the problem with this is that if I don't get them where they've asked me to get them, they're going to blame me for this, even though they're the ones that are not, answering the call. And so I just told them in one meeting, I said, look, we said this, and this isn't happening. We're not here, and this is going on. I kind of highlighted everything, and I said, people, foreplay is over. It's time to fuck. And what seemed like 4 days went by in the silence, right? That was the one strategic moment that I was, maybe risking it.
But it seems kind of in the nature of what you do, because people are coming to you because what they've been doing is not working. Right, they need some kind of change, or they're hoping they're looking for one at least, and so it makes sense that you've got to disrupt that a bit to kind of get them to see it a different way.
Yeah, it's not fun.
Yeah,
I sort of joke about this. I said, my clients like me all the time. I'm probably missing something.
Right.
I said, because liking me is not a requirement. Trusting me is.
Yeah.
But some of the things, the transformations that happen, it's like, look. It's not even my job to be right. It's my job to be disruptive, because if I can interrupt that, even if I'm wrong, it'll tell us which way right is. Mm-hmm. And the results really speak for themselves. I had a client that hired me because there was just friction kind of all over her world. And she texted me and she said, you've doubled my revenues, you've eliminated my stress, and you saved my marriage. That took us 4 months.
Wow.
It's 4 months. We had another one that said she wanted to take she had an HR company. She said she wanted to take her 6-figure business to a 7-figure business. She said she didn't want to work more than about 32 hours a week. She said she wanted to be a digital nomad so she could, travel around whenever she wanted to. And then she half-jokingly said she'd really like to find the man that she's someday going to marry. Well, that took me a little longer. It was about 9 months.
Mm-hmm. So on those 4 months and 9 months examples, right? What is that, just so we all have some understanding, what does that look like? Do you meet with them once a week, once a month? What for how long?
At the risk of sounding like an attorney, it depends.
Yes. Thank you, sir. I appreciate that. I would never say that. I just give the answer.
It really does depend.
Yeah, sure.
It's a function of what is the meal that they're asking me to cook, and how much heat do I need, right?
Sure.
So that's where I'm just going to calibrate to the client's magnetic north. And ultimately, what I have to do is I have to get them far enough out of their comfort zone and keep them within their range of tolerance, right?
Sure.
Like, I refer to human beings as human systems, right? These integrated systems, mind, body, spirit kind of thing. And every system has its tolerances, and it's different human to human. And so if I take somebody beyond their tolerances, if I take them out of range, well, they're going to go into full-blown collapse, and then I got to dig them out, and that's a lot of work, and I don't want to work that hard. So I don't want to work on them. I just
I was wondering, do you get a lot of resistance to trying to disrupt the thinking patterns of people? Because they're coming to you for help, but I know, being humans, we tend to hold on to, there's some security in these thought processes. That's our reality, as you said, So I wonder, do you encounter a lot of pushback, or do you find that most of the people you work with kind of willingly try to walk down that path with you?
There's an interesting answer to that. Is a great question, because yes, there is a ton of resistance, but it's not directed at me.
I see.
The resistance is within them, right? It's their own resistance against themselves, because in that feedback loop that I mentioned, they're clinging to the reality of their understanding because that's safe, that's home base, right? So they have to push through their own resistance to kind of break that. But they don't project that onto me very often. It's very rare that I have to deal with that.
Well, when you elevate that to the group level, are you essentially kind of doing the same thing and trying to break down some of the collective, thoughts about this is just the way it is?
Yeah.
Is it a similar process, or are there differences in how you approach it with a group?
Yeah, I mean, there are differences with a group, but I am still dealing with sort of a collective oneness as well as the individuals. So I need to there's sort of like two calibrations that need to happen at the individual level and at the relational level. But ultimately, it's I would say the resistance in a group happens at a rate of about 10%. There is 1 out of 10 that's just arms folded, not having it, and I typically that person is either going to get on board real quick or get out of my room because they're not paying me to deal with that.
Yeah.
It's like the organization has asked me to get them somewhere in a certain amount of time, and if that's in my way, I mean, my job is to remove whatever's in my way because I don't give a shit, right?
Do you find those people are often the decision makers in the group? I was wondering because in a group you're going to have different people. Some are going to just be the followers and going to go along. Do you have to identify certain people that you really have to change their?
No. The person that's going to give me heat like that in a room is the person that's been told they're doing this. They don't have enough autonomy. They didn't necessarily opt into this.
Yeah.
Or every now and then, they see me as some sort of leadership threat. Because this is the person that's used to be in charge of this team, and now who's this guy coming in? But I bring a different skill set, and so if that person is open and has kind of has a growth mindset and sees the opportunity for them, this is going to go really well. If they're going to give me static and friction, it's like, look, your organization hired me to do this, and you're in my way, and I don't do things in my way. So let's have a 10-minute conversation and get this cleared up in whatever way we need to. But I'm moving on. So it's just a question of whether you're coming with me or not.
Fair enough.
When you're working with a business and you're reorienting them, I know you said it depends with an individual, and I'm sure it does with a company too. But is that a shorter process, a longer process with a company? Like, is it harder to turn a group than maybe an individual?
Depends on the size of the organization. Most of my engagements don't go much beyond a year. I'd say, they're going to be pretty quick, project-based kind of stuff. We need to get from here to there in this amount of time to this budget, ready, go. So if we're talking about like a major cultural thing, that's going to be a longer-term play. I don't do too much culture stuff. I know a lot of people that do that kind of thing, but ours is much more project-based. I think if you're Ford Motor Company and you want to beat Ferrari at Le Mans, well, we're Shelby America.
Yeah.
Just, hook us up.
Gotcha.
Yeah, very good. So I got to imagine that right, we talk about feelings and results and so forth earlier in the operating system. I can imagine when you're dealing with the individuals, at least, that there's plenty of them that can come to you and say, I don't like the result. Mm-hmm. But I suspect they often can't identify why they're getting to that result or the feelings that are causing this or the other things. So how do you help them work through so you can actually identify the issue and because the result is the result, but you got to go backwards in that system.
Yeah, you can reverse engineer that loop. I mean, here's the thing about the why, though, and I sort of joke about this, but I tell clients, look, it's not that I don't care about your past. Actually, that's exactly what it is. I don't give a shit. I really don't care about your childhood. I don't care. I don't care. Here's the thing about it. People that need the why. This is just kind of an academic masturbation kind of thing. This is the brain loving to feel important and figure things out and think it's doing its job. It's like, look, you're just wasting time because at the end of the day, why you are where you are on the map, it's where you are on the map, right? I don't really care how we got here. I need to know where we're going. And most of the time, I don't need to know how we got here in order to get to where I'm going because it's a function of alignment. So I don't really need to know too much about the past most of the time. Every now and then I got to dig around, and if somebody really needs to know why, I'll go dig around and find out, but, it's just going to take us a little longer.
I'll give you a root canal if you'd like.
Right. Well, and and the other thing is that time kills deals. Right?
Yeah, well, for sure.
Right? Okay. Yeah. Success loves speed.
Yes.
Loves it. Right? So if I can get somebody on this moving faster, then my buddy Matthew says, Chris has one speed, full speed.
That's funny.
That reminds me, I had a question. I think I saw it on your website, and this is more going back, I think, to the flow state thing. You talked about how you'd rather be the difference between being fast and being quick. Mm-hmm. Could you talk a little bit about that? Because I was I think our audience will enjoy hearing a little more about that distinction and why it's better to be quick.
Yeah, well, quick is this is where precision comes in as well, right? So you think of like NASCAR, for example. I'm going to stick with car analogies today. Anybody can get fast by building up speed over time, right? A couple of laps, right? Being quick is the ability to be fast in a hurry. So that's like a dragster, right?
Yeah.
The thing is, when you stop on the gas and you slowly build up speed, it doesn't require the same level of precision as when you get launched off an aircraft carrier, right?
Yeah, sure.
So if you're going to be quick, you better be precise. You better be very meticulous about things. And so certain things are going to be in the way of that, and so we got to remove a lot of the distraction, a lot of the things that are going to sort of take our eye off the prize. There's no room for error, so there's no room for ego. There's no room for who's right or wrong. There's no room or time for blame and judgment. This is not going to get us quick at all. So if I say this to clients a lot. Do you want to be right or do you want to be effective? Do you want to be right or do you want to be quick? Do you want to be right or do you want to win? Do you want to be right or do you want to get what you want?
Yeah.
Right? When I was 23, this guy asked me, "Well, do you want to be right or do you want to be loved?" Still took me 20 more years to learn what he meant by that. But 2 divorces and 20 years later, I did it. Got it.
Yeah. Well, you mentioned it sounds like ego can be an impediment to being quick, wanting to be that sort of way. Are there other types of things that get in people's way when you're coaching them on how to be quicker?
They'll advocate for the status quo. There's a great quote. I wish I could remember. I can't cite the source, but it says, I think it was Eleanor Roosevelt, said if you advocate for your limitations, you get to keep them.
Yeah.
Right? And so if, like, I have 3 questions when I start with a client. The question number 1 is, what do you want? Mm-hmm. And then they'll tell me. They say, okay, good. What do you really want? And then they'll tell me. I say, okay. 3rd question, what is it you really want? Because most of the time when somebody tells me what they want, it's rooted in what they believe is possible or what they've had.
Yeah.
So if I can break that and say, okay, look, if you could wave a magic wand and reality is not even a real thing, where would you be on the map right now? And then they tell me, I'm like, okay, that's now, because if it doesn't scare the shit out of you, we're not thinking big enough.
Right.
And so that's the thing is, getting them to admit what is true. Once I do that, then I can change things.
So what I want to talk about, though, is at the end of all of our shows, we try to ask people about advice they may have or inspiring things. And I think you already said you make the impossible possible. In fact, you make it actual. You make it come to life for people, or you help them make their possible become reality. But you talked about it a little about your hockey experience, but I happen to know you just a little bit, and I don't know of a more inspiring conversation about how the impossible is actually doable, given where, if you can just talk about where you were right before this company and your DJ and how where you were living or what you were living in, because look where you are now, right?
All right, so I found myself one day in the span of about, I don't know, it was like maybe a couple of weeks. I had lost my job, my apartment, and my girlfriend. And so there I was with no place to go. I'm like, all right, well, I got to figure out how to live here all of a sudden. And I had a job offer on the table. This guy that I knew, he had said at one point, fairly like within the previous couple of months, he had said, God, I wish you worked for me. Well, now there I am out of a job, and so he's my first call, right? Remember when you said that? And he was a commercial real estate guy, and so I went out, I met with him, and we had that conversation, and he kind of showed me around and everything, and I forecasted for it. I said, okay, so let's say I do this. Where am I a year or 2 from now? 3? It's like, well, I'm making a good living. I'm, hustling. I'm doing the work or whatever. And now I have a lifestyle that I need the income that I've been generating in order to support. And now I'm trapped. And it's like, it's a good life. It's fine. It's fine. It's fine. How are you? Fine. How are you? Good. That wasn't enough for me. Maybe it's just a function of my childhood or whatever, but I'm a high sensation person. Fine isn't. It's just not. Good isn't.
It's not fine.
It's not fine. It's not okay.
Fine's never. Fine's a sign that it's definitely not fine.
Right. It's fine. And so I decided, no, I'm not going to do it. I'm just going to figure out how to live with this beat ass car, and which was really fun. I mean, it was. It had a side view mirror held on by duct tape. The windshield wipers had zip ties on them. It had a broken tail light. It eventually had an what do you call it? A catastrophic internal event.
So it was fine.
That was not fun.
Was that fine? Oh, okay.
Yeah, I was like, Mike, sounds like you're telling me buy a new engine, buy a new car. He's like, yeah. I'm like, all right. So, but I did. I basically lived out of that car and on my friends' couches that were willing to feed me and put me up and whatever. And I was scraping together enough money day to day to just put gas in the car and try and eat. There were days that I didn't eat. But it's not like I chose that, right? It wasn't like I was on a level of destitute and that, where I just didn't have any way to, I had a choice. Mm-hmm. And it's, people ask me, why didn't you take the job and then build your thing on the side? Because my human system doesn't work that way. Like, I'd be too comfortable. It wouldn't have enough heat to cook the meal.
Sure.
Right? Whereas other people, that would be a level of stress that they can't tolerate. They would need the safety and the income and then build the thing on the side. So, there's no one right way to do it or anything. I wouldn't say my way is the right way. It's just what I did based on who I am and how I work. And in my experience with myself and with anybody else, the craziest bet is also the safest one. And that's when you bet on yourself.
Sure.
And that's, I don't know, that's how you win.
All right. I'll ask you one more question. So,
all right. What do you got?
So just somebody's out there in this world today, right? And they're not getting the results that they want in their life. Mm-hmm. Like what basically would you tell them to do to try to, right? Maybe they're dreaming about starting their own business, and instead they're just exactly like you said. They're trapped in. They're doing well. They have a wife. Maybe they have kids, and they're like, my dream is this, and now they're making themselves miserable probably at work, right? So how do they change the mindset? Not obviously, we're not going to go through the whole thing.
There's a whole lot of answers.
So
I think step one, this is not a color by numbers kind of thing.
Yeah.
Every engagement is wildly different. So I would say that step one for pretty much everybody comes down to personal responsibility. You are 100% the creator of your reality. And if you're willing to let go of the fear and the shame and whatever, and take ownership of that responsibility, right? Full responsibility, which is not fault, that's ownership. Taking full ownership that you are the sole creator of your reality, that's a very powerful place to be, because if this is what you've created, then, well, you can create whatever you want. You can create anything if you're willing to accept full responsibility. Mm-hmm. I could blame my parents or whatever for my upbringing. I could blame, I can point the finger and feel really good, but that doesn't get me anywhere. So while none of my childhood was my fault, all of it is my responsibility, and that's a different thing.
Yeah. So, go ahead.
I was going to say, how would people find you? I mean, like if somebody, an individual or a company would like to hire you,
yeah,
website you can direct them to.
Yeah, absolutely. My half broken website at statusflow.net. I tore it apart and then rebuilt it, and so it's so statusflow.net. We're on Instagram as well at the statusflow.
And obviously, Donna mentioned your podcast earlier.
Yeah. We have the Mindfuck podcast. Yeah, that's on Apple and Spotify. The thing about that is, and this was my marketing guy's idea. He's like, because I was really bored listening to myself talk. And he said, why don't you just start running sessions with individuals, do one-offs? And I'm like, all right, let's see how it goes. Uh-huh. The first one was this woman, Allison, and it took me about 8 minutes to figure out what the deeper thing was, and about another 4 minutes to walk her up to do it. But in 12 minutes, she had a transformational experience. To this day, her life is forever changed. That was a couple of years ago now.
Sure. So where do they find it at, though?
Yeah, it's on Apple. It's on Spotify. Yeah, Mindfuck.
They won't forget that name.
Yeah, I know, right? Just don't search for it at home, or at the office, rather. Don't. That might cause your IT guy issues.
So, Chris, thank you for joining us. But is there anything that we didn't cover that you'd like to cover?
Hey, getting me talking is easy. Getting me to shut up is the trick. So,
true story.
Thank you so much for having me. It's really
thank you for being here. This has been great.